Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Stephen Spotswood, a finalist for the new Blood Dagger Award, a writer of the New York Times Book Review Best Crime and Mystery of the Year, also a playwright too, with a new novel out. It's called Dead in the Frame. We talk about what he's learned from writing plays and then moving on to full big novels. Also getting into the routine, we discover what makes a good day.
If I can get a solid beat written, either like a plot beat or some kind of emotional arc, if I can get that down, I feel like I have had a good day. And sometimes that means like that is an entire chapter. Sometimes it might just be like a very thorny scene or a very important scene within a chapter.
And as a mystery writer who doesn't really know much of the plot, how he's looking to figure out the solution just like the reader.
My favorite way of writing mysteries is to like dig a hole and throw my characters in it, and then together we will figure out how they get out. So when I came up with the idea of Lillian is framed for a murder and is sent to jail, I did not know how she and Will were going to solve this.
It's all on the way with Stephen Spotswood in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name is Dan Simpson. Thank you so much for being there. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look inside an author's working day. We discover when, where, and hopefully how they do things. What do they do that gives them the best chance of getting words on the page, and then the page into a book, and hopefully the book into thousands of homes. This week we are with Stephen Spotswood. He's a playwright, worked as a journalist too, been in the frame for many awards, a Nero Award Winner, New York Times Book Review Best Crime and Mystery of the Year, an Edgar Award Nominee, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a finalist for the new Blood Dagger Award, and he's back with a new Pentecost and Parker mystery novel. It's called Dead in the Frame. It's out at the start of February. It sees the sleuthing duo Willowjean Parker and Lillian Pentecost back. They're in 1947. They've made a name for themselves as the premier detective outfit in New York City. And in the new novel, an old enemy is killed. Lillian is the prime suspect, where she is hauled off to the notorious women's house of detention, and the race is on to get Pentecost free and find the real killer. We talk about the idea for the novel and the first seed of the detective duo as a whole, and how what it is now has changed since that first seed. Also, how he pays attention to the little details of writing in the past. You can hear how physical fitness helps mental output. How much a location to a home, how much does that influence creativity? And we talk about what he's learned from writing 90,000 words of novels after so much time with 20,000 words of plays. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get into it with Stephen Spotswood. And we start, as we always do, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
Well, I live in a row house in D.C., a 3-story row house, 2 stories above ground, 1 story below ground. And my office is in the basement. It's a finished basement, and I use the word finished very loosely. It has drywall and tile and sort of a suggestion of heat, a rumor of heat. So I have beside me a tiny little space heater, trying to keep me warm. Otherwise, my office is about an 8x10 room. Not, a little bigger than a cell, still with the default white paint that the real estate folks put on it, like 15 years ago when we moved in. Not that you can really see the paint because every wall is covered. On one wall, there are bookshelves. There is my desk, which is a secretary desk that I picked up for I think $10 at a farm auction about 20 years ago. There's a stand with a turntable. There are some more shelves with boxes of comics. There's boxes of vinyl records. And there is art on every available wall space, including the door. And then there's a carpet on the floor. So that is what I like sit down to every morning to work. I should, in the interest of full disclosure, say that also every flat surface available is covered with action figures of varying sorts. During the pandemic, I used to collect them as a younger person. And then during the pandemic, I was looking for, hits of serotonin, like I think many of us were. And I discovered, hey, you could order these and go buy it. And just little hits of serotonin, like every week. And so every week has like built up. And now there are a couple of hundred little plastic people surrounding me. Yeah. So that is like that is my nerddom on display.
Oh, please. I'm always amazed when I do this at the environments, and that's why we start, because some writers I've spoken to like things to be tremendously clinical. They don't want anything distracting around them. You have your nerddom, as you say. There's not a spare bit of wall that's not covered in some, I would assume, colourful art. Why do you need the busyness around you?
I think I don't know if I need the busyness. I seem to thrive in the busyness. Part of it is a side effect of me trying to keep all of this contained to my space, and not subject my wife to having all of this spread out throughout the rest of the house. So it's like I try and keep everything in this, 8x10 room. And it's I don't know. It's gotten to the point where like maybe it is because I have all of this noise around me, all of this brightness, all of this stuff, that I can kind of work anywhere. I don't need it to be clinical. You can stick me in a crowd, in a coffee shop, in anything, any place, in an airport, and just give me a laptop and preferably some headphones. And I can go to work.
What's normally piped through the headphones?
Another little side effect of the pandemic is that, and then being not stuck at home, but sort of doing more and more of my work here at home. Like I rediscovered or got into vinyl records. So usually I will just like pick an album for the day, and that is what I'll be playing on the turntable. And then I'm not wearing headphones, and it's just, coming out the speakers. Right now, I have up The Cure's Songs of a Lost World, which is the most recent album, like they put out after 20 years of taking a break.
Does the vinyl selection of the day tend to mirror what you're going to embark on writing through that day? Do you marry those up at all? I don't usually think that deeply. Otherwise, I might just be staring at the bins of vinyl for too long. And also, I don't always know what I'm going to be writing that day. I will say that like sometimes I make the decision. Like for recently, I was working on last few months, I was working on a contemporary mystery where there was a lot of religious trauma involved with the main character. So I had on Julian Baker and Lucy Dacus, who, if you don't know, they're like 2/3 of the band Boy Genius, and their work is deeply delves into sort of those themes. Otherwise, it's just, I don't want to say it's white noise, but it's sort of just a pleasant background noise. I have a lot of albums that I can't listen to when I write. Like there's some punk in here that just, I cannot put on Fugazi or Gogol Bordello and get anything done, really. Yeah. Now this might be a bit out there, but try and go with it. I'm increasingly fascinated in areas where people are living and writing, and like the energy of a space, not in a woo-woo kind of way, but like the energy of a town or a city and the vibe it has. And I've traveled through America. I've never made it to DC, but it strikes me as different places have very different feels, and people are different who live there. And I find that Americans are much better at kind of upping sticks and moving half a country away than many people, particularly here in Europe. So as I say, what do you think that like living in DC brings to your energy to write, the atmosphere of the place, the atmosphere of your piece of what you're writing, or is that utterly irrelevant, do you think?
I don't know if it's irrelevant. DC is it's a strange city. It is like very frequently defined by the presence of the federal government. It's like the nation's capital. So that's what people think of it as, is it's like, it is just the nation's capital and a bunch of monuments and museums. But you also have an actual, like if you subtracted the entire federal government, you would still have a city. You'd still have a functioning collection of neighborhoods. But I think the thing that maybe most defines DC is the international essence of it, that I could, give me half an hour and I can find somebody from nearly every corner of the world, like living and working in DC. I live in if you walked outside my door, it looks like it's just a bunch of like row houses and nice lawns. Well, our lawn is not great, but that's my fault. And it's like a very just a collection of small families. But like I walk, 13 blocks, I'm at Union Station. I walk another 10 blocks, I'm at the U.S. Capitol building. I can drive 15 minutes and I'm on Embassy Row, which is like all of the embassies, in a row. It's just like it's on the tin. So there's a great variety. Like whatever I want, like whatever I'm in the mood for, I can find it, like in 20 minits. That said, I usually do all of my writing in this little basement office. So it's like, I don't know how much impact the city has, like day to day.
Do you feel that the feel of DC changes depending on who's in office? So I guess this will come out, this episode, more or less January time, and no matter what you feel, it's going to go through quite a seismic change in the middle of January, and how much of that will kind of echo through everything that happens where you are?
Oh, I think it is deep and profound each time it happens. And more, I shouldn't say each time it happens. Although it feels like in more recent election cycles, like the change has been more profound. How much to get into this? So Washington, D.C., the people who live here, like we do not have a representative in Congress. We can vote we have council members, we have a mayor, we can vote for the president, but we don't have an elected representative in Congress. And also we operate under a system called home rule, where DC is basically allowed to govern itself. Even though the federal government is here, they're like, Washington, DC government, you are allowed to make your own laws, even though most of those laws have to get approved by Congress. It's a very weird system. And that whole idea of home rule can be stripped away from the city at any time, pretty much on the whim of the president and or Congress. So that's a thing. That's like that I feel like this month, as things change over, that will be a thing that is like a possibility if they want to take away this city's like ability to pass local laws to like basically govern itself. They can do that. So there will definitely be, I think, for the foreseeable future, a certain amount of tension, just an underlying tightening of the mental bowstrings. So yeah, that definitely affects the city.
We get quite niche and nerdy as well. So what are you writing on? What software do you use? And perhaps most crucially, what font or typeface do you prefer?
I am writing on a MacBook Air. I've had a string of MacBook Airs throughout the years. And I've been an Apple person for my entire computer using existence. I do a lot of my sort of early drafting and note taking basically, if I'm writing a skeleton draft, I am doing it in a Google Doc. Not just basically because it feels lower stakes for me. Like I can be messy. It's not an actual official document. It's it's on the cloud. And it's a good question about font on Google. Oh, Arial. I use Arial. Sans serif. That feels very, very low stakes when you're working in a sans serif font. But once I'm ready to actually start the actual official document, it's Microsoft Word, and it's Cambria. Cambria is the font that I have used forever. I don't know. I picked it back when I was an undergrad, and I have not moved from it. And I don't know if I could move from it at this point. But yes, it is it's not quite Times New Roman, but it is pretty basic. I'm a morning person. I will roll out of bed usually around 6:30. And I will do so quietly, because my wife is not a morning person. I'll come downstairs. I will brew up a pot of coffee. I will do the morning exercises and stretches that have become a part of my routine as I've aged. And then once I have enough coffee for a full cup, I will come down to my little basement room, and I will usually start working right away. If I am in the middle of a project, I will dive right in. I find that my brain works best like first thing in the morning, and it just slowly deteriorates between morning and say 1 p.m. So I will just sit and start writing, turn the music on, turn the little space heater on if it is like it is now winter, and just get as much done as I possibly can in that amount of time. So sometimes I will pause to do all of the emails that are absolutely necessary, all the ones that are timely. Occasionally, a podcast interview. And then sometime around noon, 1 o'clock, I will ascend for lunch. And then sometimes in the perfect day, I should say, I will end more like 11:30, head to the gym. But for the last, I guess, like 6-7 years, I've belonged to a mixed martial arts gym. So I take jujitsu classes when I am healthy. So in a perfect world, I will go and spend an hour being tied into a pretzel, and then come back home, lunch, shower, then lunch, really. And then spend a few hours reading, doing the less essential emails. And then eventually, sometimes around like 4 or 5 o'clock, my brain starts working again. And I come back down to the basement and pick up where I left off until dinner time. And then it's up to dinner, and then it's just vegging out and doing whatever house sundry chores need done until bedtime at like midnight. And then I will rinse, repeat. That is like a kind of a perfect, if I have nothing else and I am currently writing, day for me.
Away from the writing, what made you embark upon jiu-jitsu as your preferred form of exercise?
So before I was a novelist, I was a playwright. I'm still a playwright. And back in 2016, around then, I wrote a play called Girl in the Red Corner, about a woman whose life is transformed when she embarks on training in mixed martial arts. And it was a relatively successful play. It won like the Helen Hayes Best New Play Award, which is the local theater awards in DC. And during the development process, the theater company I was working with partnered with a local MMA gym. And the owner of the gym became our fight consultant. And he basically was like, hey, everyone can take classes for free for like this entire process and rehearsals and the production. Just come in, take whatever classes you want. And I was of the mind of, if I'm going to have my actors do a thing, I should be willing to at least try it. And so I went in, I took a Muay Thai class, which is, it is like Thai kickboxing, basically. And I had never done anything. I am not a physical, I was until that point, not like a sporty person. I was not a physical person. Like most of my life was cerebral and at a desk. But I went and I did this thing and I survived, and I was like, oh my God, I actually survived this. Maybe I'll try it again. And so then I just kept going back and eventually joined the gym. Spent 3 years training in Muay Thai, and then because of scheduling, switched over to jiu-jitsu. This was right before lockdown. Not a good time to take up a very close combat sport. There was for a few months, there was a lot of training with life-size stuffed like rag dolls that I don't recommend. But yeah, that's how I got started in that. It still feels weird to me when I tell people that, because I'm just in my head, I'm still not that person. But I guess like after this many years, I am that person. Yeah.
How have you found a correlation between physical fitness and the peak of what you're able to creatively output?
I have found if I am not exercising regularly, if I'm not going to the gym regularly, if I am, say, injured or ill and I can't get there, I get real, I don't want to say bitchy, but let's say bitchy. And at the same time, if I am not writing regularly, if I'm not working on something new, I get the same way. And I think if I'm doing both of the things, at the same time, regularly and like consistently, both improve. Like I'm more mentally balanced and I'm more physically balanced. Yeah. And it also lets me, like the jujitsu has seeped into my work. Like my main character in the Pentecost and Parker series, we never use the word jujitsu, I don't think, but like she is like she knows a lot of self-defense stuff. And I get to like have her run through moves that I learned in class, except she does them much better than me.
You mentioned that in the morning you like to be as productive as you can. You have a little afternoon lull. How long has it taken you to understand that that's the best way that you work, that you'll all go before your lunchtime and then you're able to pick it up again a little later on in the day before dinner? Relatively quickly.
Before I was like writing books, I had a part-time day job where I went to an office, and like even then, like I got into the pattern of like everything gets done before lunch. After lunch, everything just starts to slow down. I think over time I have like stopped trying to force myself to be something else. Like I'm just like, look, work in the morning, you're good in the morning, you do good stuff in the morning, then allow yourself to take a break. Don't try writing all day long, because those early afternoon hours is just going to be, moving the furniture around basically on a document. It's not going to have any progress. It's just going to be like little fiddlings. So yeah, I think like that is the lesson I've learned over time, is just to not try and force myself to have patterns that just don't fit me.
And if you have this concentrated amount of time and you know that it's not like your time is that limited, because you do have the leisure on a perfect day of quite a lot of time to write, how do you know what makes it a good writing day? Is there an aim to what you want to do? A word count? Is it a point of the novel? Is it just when you feel that you're spent?
I think I don't track word count. I don't track word count. So it's not that. I think it is if I can get a solid beat written, either like a plot beat or some kind of emotional arc, like if I can get that down, at least one of those down, I feel like I have had a good day. And sometimes that means like that is an entire chapter. Sometimes it might just be like a very thorny scene, or a very important scene within a chapter. So really it's like there's some scenes where it's like the word count might be 500, but as far as like importance to the story, it is the same as like another scene that is 2000.
If you do have this concentrated time of writing again, have you learned anything along the way that really helps those be productive? Maybe it's something that you do the night before, or it's just a way that you start your day and you know that you've given yourselves the best chance of getting the words down and finding that beat? I think
that's a good question. Two things, there's probably more things, but two that I can think of. One is I write quick and sloppy. Especially like for first drafts. I just keep going. If there is a name of a character that happened 5 chapters ago and I don't remember what that name is, I just put a bunch of question marks. I keep moving. I don't spend time Googling details. I don't spend time in that first draft, like going down rabbit holes. I always try and keep just forward momentum, and I do not care how ugly the first draft is. Like the goal is done. That is what I want. I want it to be done. And once everything is out, then I can go back and make it as neat and solid as it can be. But I think the freedom of allowing myself to just write messy first drafts means that I feel much better. I can start quicker. I'm not worried about things being pretty. And then I try generally to end in near the end, but not quite near the end of a beat or a scene. Like I give myself I don't wrap up a chapter in a little bow. I like leave off that last moment so that I can start with that moment the next day. And it's like just a little bit of a jump start. It's like, I know what I need to write. I know I have to write this paragraph, and that's like a gimme, first thing in the morning. And that just allows me to get some momentum going for that day.
I'm always really interested in people who openly write messy drafts, because how does that set you up for your second draft? Like, how different is the mindset? How much do you know? Like when you're finishing that first dirty draft, is there a thought there? It's like, oh no, I'm going to have to do this all again, and I need to remember what this person's name is, and I need to cobble together maybe an idea that's completely changed. How much of an undertaking is that part of things?
If I am midway through and I realize that there is a large plot change, like I'm like, oh, this character that I thought was one thing is actually another thing. And from this point on, I'm going to have to write them entirely differently. Then maybe I will stop and go back and revise what I have so far. Otherwise, if it's just small things, if like I can see that the skeleton is there, or if like I have the plot beats, but it's like the emotional beats that are mushy, or I don't know. That's okay. I feel like that's okay. That means like I can, I get to the end, and then I have sort of the shape of the thing. I have like all the puzzle pieces laid out on the floor, that are sort of in the right spaces. And when I go back, I can start to make things tighter. I can start to fill in the gaps. It's a lot of like, I can start to add in a lot of the connective emotional tissue of the characters, of like how they are reacting to the events of the story. And I generally write fast. Like I write a lot of drafts quickly. My wife, who's also a writer, she writes young adult fiction, is the exact opposite. She writes slowly, but she writes exceptionally clean first drafts. And we've decided like her first draft is very much like my fourth draft, in like cleanly. And it takes us about the same amount of time to get to that point, except I'm just going over it again and again and again and tightening things up, while she is revising in process. So when she hits the end, it is already very, very pretty. And when I hit the end, I have to go back and then go through it like 4 or 5 times.
When you're at home with your wife, another writer, how much is there like an active attempt to try and learn from each other? You know, you're both helping over the dinner table. I imagine you're discussing how that day's writing's gone. Is there any part that where you're trying to cherry pick the best bits of what each other is doing to improve the way that you work?
Oh, absolutely. And we're constantly reading. Like we don't wait for dinner time. Like she will send, like if she's working on a book, she will send me chapters to read. I will do the same. And early on in when I started writing mysteries, we discovered that I have a mind for plot. Like I'm very good at plot. I think it comes from being a playwright, and having a very limited amount of theatrical real estate in order to build a story. And that has translated very well into writing mysteries. But I don't know. I'm just very good at plot, and she is exceptionally good at emotional arcs of like beat to beat. How do people feel about things? Like recently, she's been working on a new book, and I have been helping her, like in the early drafts, helping her like figure out sort of plot details. And early in my writing career, she was key. In the very first draft of the first Pentecost and Parker book, she read it and she came back and she was like, okay, but how does she feel about all of this? Like, I want more about what your main character is feeling about all of the events of the story. And that made me go back and like think very deeply about that emotional connective tissue about like how the mystery is impacting people personally, and internally. And that has like since become like the driving force of these books, and the part that I enjoy the most. Like the plot and the mystery is basically a scaffolding that I can use to like hang all of this emotional development of these characters over time. So yeah, so that is like a trade-off that we made early on, and also like a regular collaboration.
More with Stephen in just a second. If you're enjoying the show, if you would like to support us and help out, well, the podcast and everything, you can do that on our Patreon page. A couple of ways, actually. You can do it at patreon.com/writersroutine by supporting us with just a few dollars a month over there. You get merch, there is bonus content, and there is even a way for your book to sponsor the show. If you would like me to give it a big plug before an episode or two, I'd love to do that. You can make that happen on Patreon. That's if you fancy a kind of regular monthly subscription and to support that way. If you would just like to make one donation, a tip, just send something the podcast way, you could do that as well on Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/writersroutine. I know that might be a much easier and more sustainable way for you to do it, just for you to support whenever you like. You can do that on our Ko-Fi page. It all comes to the podcast. It helps me dedicate the time to getting you this show, to interview the greatest authors around and see how they get stuff done. So to support us, you can pledge on Patreon or Ko-Fi. The links are wherever you're listening. You can find them both at writersroutine.com too. Let's get back to it, chatting then with Stephen Spotswood. We're talking about his new novel, Dead in the Frame, and the genesis of his sleuthing duo Pentecost and Parker, and how they've changed in those years. Also, as he's discovering it at the same time as a reader, is he ever worried that a mystery might not get solved in time? We discover, and we pick things up talking about playwriting and how it's affected what he does well and also less well.
You have a limited amount of space, you have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of audience attention span. So it has trained me to just squeeze a story into the smallest space possible, to like pare it down to its essential elements. Like even plays that are deeply character driven still have really tight plots where like it's dominoes. It's like one thing tips over and causes the next thing to happen and causes the next thing to happen. And that has translated very well into mystery writing, which at its core is this, it can be this very Rube Goldberg machine of just things tipping over, and one thing causing another, these this clockwork. And so that's been the pro. The con, well, first was learning the endurance and the stamina of writing a novel, which like a play is, let's say like 15 to 20,000 words. And like the last novel I wrote is 95,000 words. So there was a certain amount of training my brain to be like, yes, we just hit 20,000 words, but we have much more to go. Keep working. So that was a thing. And then also, with playwriting, I work with a crew of fantastic collaborators. I'm working with actors. I'm working with designers. I'm working with a director. And I have other people making certain choices for me. Like, I don't have to think about what my character looks like because I'm an actor on stage looking like that character. I don't have to think deeply about what they're wearing, usually, because I have a costume designer who is making those choices. I don't have to think about where my actors' hands are at any given time and like what they're doing and what their expression is, because they are making these artistic choices. And in a book, I have to think about these things constantly. Like what are her hands doing in this moment? Like where is she in this space? What is she wearing every day? I have learned so much about women's fashion in the mid 40s. It's great. I did not think I would become like an ersatz expert on that, but there you go. But yeah, those like not having those collaborators has made me have to pay much more attention to these little things. I will say, like when I'm writing a skeleton draft, like a lot of those chapters are just dialogue. It's just the words as if it were a play. And I'm like, okay, when we get back to this, we're going to have to figure out what these people are actually doing when they're talking to each other. Cause these characters are not going to just pop off the page and go out and do it for me.
You mentioned the stamina of mentally keeping going when you've hit about 20,000 words. How much was there a change in stamina in the actual plotting of the thing? I know that you don't do a tremendous amount. I think that's what you said. But when you're writing a play, you know that you can get from A to B, that you can have the 3-act structure in 20,000 words. Whereas for 90,000, it needs to breathe a lot more. How much of a challenge was that to deal with? That
was actually kind of nice. That I had these moments where the characters could breathe, where I could, because in a play, like you really don't have subplots anymore. Like you don't have little tangents. You don't have the freedom to have your characters go off on little mini adventures or have like long moments of thought. But in a novel, I get that. It really was like, it was sort of like, like a Superman coming to Earth and like, oh, I have the yellow sun, and that yellow sun is like all of this word count with which I can just sort of spread out. And it felt great. That said, I was also have to be like, okay, I cannot meander forever, even though I have the freedom of this word count. I have to keep things going. And so I think like over time, especially the last couple of books, like my outlining has become, more intense. Like I have discovered the joy of the skeleton draft, which is basically a glorified outline of like, here's the chapter to chapter events, but also some whatever much like chunks of dialogue you want to throw in there. And doing that allows me to like at least have the shape of the entire thing and know when and where I can go on tangents, where I can expand, where I can have the characters think and feel. Yeah. See, now I am rambling. Now I am spreading out into too much space.
No, that's good. I mean, we're not Joe Rogan. This is not going to go on for 4 hours, but it's nice that you've been given the space to do that. Just one more on the playwright, and I know that this has transferred somewhat into your novels as well. On your playwright kind of page online, it says writes exclusively female protagonists. Why and how are you as a man able to do that effectively? Do you think? What have you had to teach yourself to be able to portray? And I'm not someone that thinks, you can only, stay in your lane. You can only write your wheelhouse. But it's really interesting to know how you've managed to do that effectively.
Well, I think first that's a lie. I don't write exclusively female protagonists because I think there's at least one play that was successful in the last 10 years that had a male protagonist. I've got to revise. I don't know where it says that, but I got to revise it. But I do write almost exclusively for women. And it started in grad school. If I went to grad school for playwriting, and the vast majority of the actors available were women, and so it started partly as a practical consideration. That there were also just far more women in the field than men, and a lot of talented women who. Basically, the majority of the plays were written for men, and the majority of the actors looking for work were women, and just a ton of talent was going unrealized year after year and season after season. So I think that partly pushed me towards writing more for women. And this also, the majority of my close friends throughout my life have been women. So I feel much more comfortable talking with them than with men. I do not know why, but that's just how I grew up. And so it just sort of naturally evolved. And sort of it was a no-brainer when I started writing novels, because I'd been writing for women for the stage for at that point 10 years. It wasn't even a conscious decision. I just started doing it. And it seems to be going okay. I have not gotten dinged for anything. I don't think I've done anything dumb yet. Yeah. I'm not sure what the seed was for Dead in the Frame, but I know what the seed was for the series as a whole. Can I talk about that instead? And maybe I will remember what the seed was for Dead in the Frame. So back in 2018, I was going through my collection of old mid-century paperbacks, mystery novels, and I came across Nero Wolfe, or Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe series, which for listeners who are not familiar with Nero Wolfe, Rex Stout was a writer. He wrote the Nero Wolfe series from the 1930s through the 1970s. And it was kind of the marrying of the British mystery with the American hard-boiled voice. So you had the very clockwork mystery and the genius detective, if a bit of an asshole detective, and then his right-hand man who narrated the series and had a very hard-boiled patois. And I was oh, I really liked this when I read it. I'm going to read it again. I was oh, I'm going to read another one. And then I realized that he had written 60 some stories during those decades, and I decided to read all of them in order from the 30s through the 1970s. And somewhere in there, in the middle of it, I just considered, what if I was given the intellectual property rights to write these characters in the 21st century. Because the characters, they don't change. They don't change from the 30s to the 70s. They stay the same, and the world changes around them. And I very quickly was no, they wouldn't work. These characters would not work in the 21st century. But then I was well, what if I what would I write? If I had this sort of template of, the brilliant detective and, the right-hand man, who's going off and finding the clues and getting into fistfights. And I thought, well, first off, I would immediately made them both women. And then I figured out that I would write them right at the end of World War II. And that's sort of like where like Pentecost and Parker, where Lillian Pentecost, like the genius detective, and Will Parker, her right-hand woman, sort of formed, is because I was cleaning out my bookshelf. So yeah, and it over, like, this is over now 5 books. Like, one of the fun things I've gotten to do is play with tropes, to play with like the recurring motifs that you find in mystery novels and like mid-century American crime novels. Like the very first one was like the locked room murder mystery. And I guess a Dead in the Frame is another recurring trope of your detective is framed for the murder of somebody else. Like, they are arrested for a crime, and now they have to get themselves out. So yeah, so like the initial thought of, like, I guess the initial seed of Dead in the Frame is just sort of like a recurring, like, the next step in playing with these motifs, with these tropes.
So Dead in the Frame, this is Will Parker, Lillian Pentecost. This is 1947, as you say. Lillian is a prime suspect. She is hauled off to the notorious women's house of detention. So there's a lot of questions there. When you've got that initial idea that you're going to play around with these tropes, what's the process between having that initial idea and then getting to that skeleton draft? What questions are you asking? How much time are you giving yourself? How are you writing down those beat points to get to the point where you can properly flesh them out?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think when I am in that, I've found over time that my favorite way of writing mysteries is to like dig a hole and throw my characters in it. And then together we will figure out how they get out. So when I came up with the idea of Lillian is framed for a murder and is sent to jail, I did not know how, like, she and Will were going to solve this. And so I had to so I had to figure out what is Will without Lillian. What is, like, throughout this entire series, like, Will has been growing and evolving and becoming a better and better detective. But now she does not have the fallback of her mentor. She is sort of left adrift to work on this case, like, mostly by herself. So what does that mean? What skills does she bring? What mistakes is she going to make? That's always fun to figure out. And then also, Lillian's in jail. What does that mean? She spent her entire career putting people in jail, and now she is there herself. Like, how much danger is she in? And Lillian suffers from multiple sclerosis. What does that mean that she is in this place? How is that going to impact her disease? Very, very luckily, when I was starting this book, Ryan wrote a book called, he wrote a book on the New York City Women's House of Detention, like the history of it. I think it came out just like half a year before I started writing this, which was brilliant timing because I was already going to put her in the House of D, as it was called. But to have that source to sort of figure out exactly what this place was like, and what Lillian might be experiencing there and who she might be meeting, was fantastic. And so, like, I got to use that. I had to figure out the arc of Lillian's experience in jail. And also, like, how long it was going to last. Like, it was kind of up in the air. I'm like, okay, did they solve this crime in 2 weeks? Like, cause that's sort of the average. I think in previous books, it's only been like a couple of weeks where you get from like murder to solution. And I was like, what if she's in jail for months? What if we go all the way to trial? What happens then? Like, what kind of arc do we have then? And yeah, making that decision, I was like, oh, the stakes actually get kind of higher the longer she's in there. And yeah, I think like making that decision then allowed me to go in and figure out like what's the physical deterioration, what's Lillian's experience in jail, and then like how is Will faring with weeks and weeks of trying and failing to solve this and to get her friend out from behind bars. And yeah, I feel like that was probably a longer answer. A little rambly again, but
it's all good. Just a couple more questions then. You said that the idea is you're going to chuck these characters into a mystery, and you as a writer will discover it with the readers. How often is that a seamless process? How many times have you kind of almost written yourself into a dead end of a mystery, and you have no clue how they're going to get out of prison, how this thing's going to be solved?
It hasn't happened yet. Like, I haven't gotten to the point yet where I get to the end and I'm like, oh no, I I'm 80,000 words in and I've written myself into a hole. Usually, even before I was doing a skeleton draft, even before I was outlining quite so regimentedly or rigorously, I would figure it out well in advance. So usually by the 1/3 mark, I would see the hints of like where the path was to get to the end of this labyrinth. So I have yet to dig a hole so deep that we cannot get my characters out. But it is fun. It's like that is actually like one of the most fun processes in that like first draft is just figuring out with them, like thinking about like, okay, here's the information they have. Here are their skill sets. Here are the paths they can take. How do we get to the end of that labyrinth in a satisfying way that is not like a direct line, but not so convoluted that the reader and myself get bored.
And I guess this is the last question. So we started out, and you said that one of the challenges that you had was not so much characterization, but it was all plot led. But now you are, 4 novels through a mystery series with 2 characters that are very well loved and they're very well characterized, right? So you know that the stakes are being raised, that Lillian's in prison because it will affect her multiple sclerosis and stuff's happening to Will because of this. What's been the process of you discovering who these characters are, and how much have you grown to learn about them that you had no idea would have existed when you published their first novel?
Oh gosh. I've learned a ton. I sort of, in the first novel, I gave a lot of, because it's told from Will's point of view, I gave a lot of hints about her background. That she like grew up sort of in a hardscrabble household, possible abuse from her father, mother died young, ran away, literally joined the circus. And so I basically like set her up with a lot of possible trauma that she will have to spend the series in her life unpacking, and dealing with, and also setting her up with sort of the challenge of she has to eventually become as good at this job as Lillian Pentecost, because Lillian is like looking towards a future where she is going to physically deteriorate and very possibly mentally deteriorate, and Will is like her replacement in training. So like Will has this massive hurdle that every book she has to sort of reclimb, to like rediscover and like find rediscover the like inner strength to keep going. So I knew a lot about Will, I think, at the start. it's been just fun, like having her make slow, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, in dealing with all of these things. Lillian has been, for much of the first couple books, an enigma, and purposely so. She's the enigmatic genius. Her backstory is veiled for the first few books, and only in these last couple have we started to like peel back the curtain of like what her childhood is like, what her extended family might be like, what her history is like, what are the things that she is dealing with. In Dead in the Frame, several chapters are written from Lillian's point of view. They're basically transcribed journal entries of her time in the House of D, which has given the biggest window into her inner workings that we've ever seen. And that has been like just a challenge and a joy to write, because we get to peek behind the curtain of seeing her fears and her hopes, and her insecurities, even if she comes across as this monolith, this brilliant monolith who is always in control of a situation. Like, we can see that no, she is afraid for her life too. She also does not know how she's going to get out of this. And I like that. I like taking this character, this very Holmesian, who started as a Holmesian character and still is, and showing the humanity beneath everything, the sort of shared emotions.
And that is it with Stephen Spotswood in this week's Writer's Routine. The new novel is Dead in the Frame. You can get a copy right now. If you are going to do that, please do use the Writer's Routine store at bookshop.org. That way it helps out the podcast, it helps out the author, Stephen, and it helps out your local independent bookshop. And it kind of takes everything away from the big monopolies. So that would be good if you are thinking of getting the book Dead in the Frame. It's out in just a few weeks at the start of February. You can find the link wherever you're listening. Also, you can support the show, Patreon and Ko-Fi, links in the episode notes, and we've got them both at writersroutine.com too. That's where you get in touch with me too. You can also do it on X on @WritersPod. If you are still there, I'm on Instagram and TikTok too. You can find me there if that's where you socialise. And I will see you next week with a brand new guest on the podcast. Until then, have a good week.